Of course, golf regionals did end up getting postponed to Monday, so I am obviously out today. It is what it is. I wish I was doing this in person, but it's all going to be the same stuff I did with Period 5 on Friday. Hopefully your sub already mentioned the Hypocrisy Challenge. You maybe even snagged it and did some of the work before you even loaded this video. But in case you haven't or came to this first, you picked 4, I think, out of the 5 celebrities is what the sheet says. A little silly. I totally meant if you have outside information you know about them, feel free to use it. You fill out the boxes. Here's the hypocrite argument for LeBron. Here's the not a hypocrite argument for LeBron, and then say what your final conclusion is. As goofy and kind of silly as the start of class thing as this is, I will collect these to start class next time, sort of like I did with the sedition case studies when I came back from Italy. Of course, the thing that I care about the most when I collect these is going to be your Thomas Jefferson boxes that I want you to do at the end of this video, because the whole theme of the notes I'm covering today are about Jefferson's leadership, his viewpoints, his decision making, and whether he was a hypocrite or not based on his values and beliefs and then actions as president. So I'll get right into it with slide 1. Unit 4 starts right off the bat with a very important presidential election, and it's going to have or be a rematch of the election of 1796 between John Adams, the Federalist, and Thomas Jefferson. Both parties had some issues going into this election. The Federalists, who have had the presidency for really the first 2 in the United States, are dealing with inner fighting and factions in their own party. Hamilton's more on the extreme side, whereas Adams, also a Federalist, is more a middle ground. The Alien Sedition Acts that they passed were very, very unpopular. And then you had that whole kind of war, quasi-war, but never turned into a full war because of Adams' decision-making, which some of his own party members didn't like. So there's inner turmoil with the Federalists. Democrat-Republicans, with their superstar Thomas Jefferson, are dealing with some issues too. And theirs is from more of a smear campaign, personal attacks, a situation with Jefferson. There are things being said about Jefferson that are kind of tarnishing his reputation from the Revolution era. The first of which was kind of the most fascinating is what at the time was gossip, was the fact that he was having an affair with one of his slaves at Monticello and having kids out of wedlock with this lady, Sally Hemings. And while that was a smear campaign back then, over time, there has been more and more truth to that. And actually, DNA evidence is insane. In, I believe, the 1990s, just like 30 years ago, DNA evidence actually proved that this was in fact true, and he fathered, I believe, 6 kids with one of his slaves. And some of those children are the only slaves of his several hundred that he ever ended up freeing in his lifetime. The other critiques of Jefferson were being thrown out that he was not a traditional form of Christian, that he was maybe an atheist or a deist or some other kind of non-common form of Christianity, which of course in that time and place, 1800, would have been kind of a damning piece of news for a public figure. So whispering campaigns for Democrat Republicans, Federalists dealing with inner issues by their own decision making in the 1790s. Carrying on, Thomas Jefferson is going to win this election. It's going to be a very close one. He wins the Electoral College 73 to 65, despite the fact that John Adams actually wins more of the popular vote. But if you remember from Unit 3, it's about the Electoral College, not so much who gets the most votes. I would call on a kid at this point if I were in person, but the 3/5 compromise, why it was so important beyond just the pure topic of slavery, was that it made a difference in who wins this. Jefferson had most of the support from the South, which of course had more slaves, and would then have more representation in the House of Representatives. Like take Virginia's 21, for example, which he won that state. Those extra representatives led to that 8-point margin of victory that Jefferson achieved. What's also odd about this election is not everything was as smooth with like your running mate, your vice president, and from Hamilton musical fame, Aaron Burr was Jefferson's running mate, but he technically also received 73 electoral votes himself, which meant he tied Jefferson, even though it was supposed to be like one less, so then he'd be VP and second. It was a whole mess, and actually had to go to Congress, and they went through like dozens of votes to try to figure out this accidental tie, but eventually Jefferson is named president and Burr becomes VP. More on that later in a future slide. Now, sometimes this election is called the Revolution of 1800 because the Democrat-Republicans get their first president. I wouldn't say that. It's a very close election. But the big deal about this is it is the first time in American presidential history that one party, the Federalists in this case, loses and hands off the presidency to a different opposing rival political party without a war or a coup or another revolution breaking out. And that's really important for young America. And really, with the exception of like an election 1860, 1876, and our last election 2020, America, one of the staples of American politics is that despite the bitterness of campaigns, the presidency is always handed off. So, when January 6th happened, for example, that's why people who really have a great knowledge of U.S. history and really care about this country were so concerned about those events because it was so unusual after the result of a presidential election. Now, we got two videos I would show in person. I'd encourage you to watch these. I know there's temptation to skip, but it's two whole videos today for a total of 9 minutes. I believe they're both linked. They're busted links. I tried to make sure they wouldn't be. That's the reason. Take the break from my voice. Watch them. 4 for Jefferson, and then 5 down the road for the Louisiana Purchase. But, of course, the video will continue. Jefferson, interesting figure in U.S. history because there's kind of two sides of him. There's the thinker, there's the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence, there's the man who started a political party, there's the thinker, the brilliant writer in U.S. history. But then there's also the man in action, the man that owned hundreds of slaves, the man who's going to make some very interesting decisions as a president. So think about that dynamic, Jefferson the thinker and then Jefferson the doer, as you listen to the rest of these notes. So let's talk, okay, what does Thomas Jefferson do when he gets into the White House? Number one, he doesn't, and this is probably a good thing, throw out all of the Federalists that were put into place by Adams and Washington in the 90s. The other challenge he's going to have to deal with is that Democrat-Republicans' greatest strength in the 90s, because they didn't hold the crown, was hating Federalists, was criticizing their policies. But now the crown, obviously not a literal one, is on the heads of the Democrat-Republicans to run America. And anybody who's ever done anything in leadership, it's so easy to criticize, but once you're in charge, your perspective and point of view and decision making completely changes. And that's what Jefferson faces in the first years of his presidency. Jefferson does come in and do some things to remit some of the things that the Democrat-Republicans loathed from the Federalists before. There are kind of a scale back. There is a scale back of the Alien Sedition Acts, like the Naturalization Law of 1802, which reduced, if you remember from the Alien Acts, it increased the amount of years you need to live in America to become a voting citizen. And they scaled that or brought that back with this naturalization law from the 14 it was extended to back down to 5 years. Okay, they cut the excise tax, which was most famously noted with the Whiskey Rebellion. He also brings in Albert Gallatin and his nose to balance the budget and cut some of the spending and cut debt. That being said, if you can see this, there might be a little screencastify thing blocking it. He did leave many Hamilton-era policies like the National Bank, the tariff, and the national debt all in place. If you do know the Hamilton musical from that song, Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story, Jefferson sings, Hamilton's plan was a thing of brilliance or something like that. I couldn't undo it if I tried, and believe me, I tried. Hamilton's foundation was so firm and strong, even an opponent of his in a future presidency wasn't going to untangle all the webs that Hamilton created. Big topic, probably one of the most important terms. It's a study guide thing. We want to follow along with this slide, and then it's the thing in red that matters the most. So here's the story to set it up. John Adams, in the midnight part of his presidency, the last hours, the last days, if you will, did something presidents do all the time, which is try to accomplish or put in place a bunch of things right before they get out, maybe to leave a legacy, but to also try to maybe slow down the new person that's coming to take office. And what Adams does is he tries to appoint a bunch of Federalist-leaning judges to the executive, or to the judicial branch, that of course would have lifetime appointments to try to kind of leave a mark and have kind of like a defense to maybe Jefferson's plans. And these people were known as the midnight judges because he's appointing them at the midnight point of his presidency. Now, James Madison, who is Jefferson's Secretary of State, he blocks the midnight judges. He doesn't want them in place. He thinks it's sketchy that they were nominated at the very last moment, and tries to prevent those judges from taking court. And one judge in particular, William Marbury, is very annoyed with this, okay? And he sues, and it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. It becomes a big issue. Do these midnight judges get their jobs or not? Supreme Court rules in favor of Madison, but that's not really what matters, because what matters is a much bigger, more macro-sized thing here, because what this case was the first time that the Supreme Court, the very tippy top of our judicial system in America, made a decision based on interpretation of the Constitution. And this is a monumental moment where the Supreme Court, really in layman's terms, gives itself its own power. And they create the power of judicial review. The Supreme Court's ability to say this is constitutional, but this is not constitutional. And that power is going to manifest and become the lifeblood of the Supreme Court for the rest of U.S. history. So when we come across things like Brown v. Board of Education, Roe v. Wade, McCulloch versus Maryland, Plessy versus Ferguson, I may have already just said that, but these massive things that impact U.S. history decided by the Supreme Court are because the Supreme Court holds judicial review. How do they get judicial review? It's because they established that through Marbury versus Madison. So it's a big watershed moment in American history. Okay, Jefferson, Democrat, Republican, states' rights, limited federal government involvement, was not a huge fan of foreign intervention and foreign conflict. And he kind of envisioned the American military not needing to be a massive operation. He thought it could be more of a small police force. We're going to avoid foreign conflict. It all sounds great on paper. Jefferson, the thinker, is coming out with this theory. But of course, what can happen sometimes, is reality sets in. And for example, a group of North African pirates, the Tripoli pirates, start causing havoc for American ships in the Mediterranean, as well as European ships. So much so that they're making informal declarations of war against the United States. So now Jefferson, with his police force, is put into a tough spot. I don't want to get involved in foreign conflict, but then we've got our own ships being harassed by small potato pirates in the Mediterranean. So what do? So this forces Jefferson to actually send in the Navy, make a peace of sorts in 1805, and go kind of against his principles, but it felt like, hey, that's what I have to do for the United States. And he actually, excuse me for hopping the slide, he makes decisions to actually make attempts, they don't go very far, to actually improve the Navy after this all happens. So again, you got Jefferson, what he wants when he takes office, but then decisions force his hand to actually kind of go against the original wishes of Jefferson, if that makes sense. Now, the biggest story of Jefferson, hypocrite, not a hypocrite, is certainly with something maybe you've even know about or remember a little bit from middle school, the Great Louisiana Purchase. So, fun story here. Spain in 1800, which controlled that giant Louisiana territory, ceded all of it to Napoleon and France. Spain's very weak. Napoleon's on the move at this time. They cede everything to France. And this makes America very fired up and nervous. France is back in North America. They're right next door. We just pissed them off because we had that Neutrality Act in the 1790s and we didn't hop in on their own revolution. Things are deteriorating with France, and now they just acquired a bunch of land, and Napoleon's dangerous. This has America concerned. So a few years later, America, or Jefferson, sends Robert Livingston over to Paris, because apparently it's always in Paris where these things happen, in 1803, with a very meager plan of offering $10 million through New Orleans, which had a lot of importance at the bottom of the Mississippi River, and really that Mississippi territory, which you can see on that map, to the east of it. But there was no intention or plan of buying some massive chunk of land that would make up the future of 13 different states in America. But here's what happens. Bonaparte changes course and actually comes back with an offer, $15 million for all of that in that dark tan yellow color on the map next to my head right now. 15 million to double the size of America. It comes out to about 3 cents an acre. That's also going to mean full control of the Mississippi River moving forward. And you might say, well, why did France do this? Napoleon's getting ready for wars in Europe, needs funds. They're also kind of spooked a little bit by that Haitian Revolution in the Caribbean, and they're just ready to just sell cheap because they don't want to deal with North America anymore. I can't imagine Livingston and the American diplomats' face when they get this deal. Jefferson fully admits that a president orchestrating a land purchase to expand the United States is completely unconstitutional. It goes against all of his values from that loose and strict interpretation stuff from Chapter 9. But holy crap, this deal is way too good to pass up. So it's the ultimate Jefferson challenge. I don't think a president should wield this kind of power to negotiate a deal like this. But my goodness, I'm an idiot if I don't take it. So it's a fun thing to think about a little bit mentally. Louisiana Purchase video, it's the other one of the two I talked about. Really, really well done. Stop and watch it. I think the one thing I would point out from it is how close. There were still people that didn't necessarily want to buy from France, and the vote in Congress is like a 2-vote difference. So America actually came ridiculously close to not even accepting that $50 million offer, and it's a great what if in American history had we not accepted what in hindsight was the deal of a lifetime. Carrying on to next slide. The Mississippi River Valley, and then what that's going to unlock from an economic standpoint, opening up the Missouri River and westward expansion and the Colorado River is going to be immense. You guys could probably, just by looking at the map of all the land we acquired, could tell me, hey, that's going to help the United States. Now, with new states do come new problems. You'll learn as the 1800s go on, as these new states enter the Union, you're going to have to decide, are they slave or are they free? And that certainly is going to add to that boiling point with slavery as we get closer and closer to a civil war. Speaking of things you may have heard about in middle school, Jefferson is going to send out a couple of explorers by the name of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, aka Lewis and Clark, to explore out west. And they're going to cover, you can see the line in red, their journeys cover over 8,000 miles of soon-to-be United States territory. And their biggest contribution here is that the amount of scientific and geographic knowledge that they are going to document and write and just generally soak in is going to be unreal for the future development of that part of the United States, even getting as far out to like the Pacific Northwest. They're also going to be kind of the icebreakers to contact with lots of Native American groups that have never dealt with the United States of America up to this point in our history. Now, obviously, those relationships are going to wane a little bit, especially post-Civil War, and we'll get to that. But Lewis and Clark, coming out of what we know as St. Louis, the arch to the west, if you've ever been there, their journeys are unbelievably important for the westward expansion that is coming in the U.S. A little word on Aaron Burr. I don't know where to put my head in this. Okay, I guess we'll fit here. Nope, just kidding. We'll put it on their pictures. Aaron Burr, who you might know if you're familiar with the Hamilton musical, was Thomas Jefferson's vice president, almost actual president with the tie. He's only going to be vice president for 4 years. And morally bankrupt is a good way to describe Aaron Burr, because he would go anywhere he thought that would help his career, or follow or pursue anything that would help his career. So much so that he would actually get involved in some extreme plots, like having the Federalist Stronghold Party have New York and New England actually try to break apart from the United States, which is like borderline treason. Hamilton was always there when Burr was ever trying to do something for himself, whether it was run for New York governor, I think a Senate position maybe. Hamilton was always there to write some articles saying, hey, you can't trust Burr. He was there when the whole tie fiasco happened to say, no, Burr can't be president, and on and on. So they became rivals of sorts, to the point that Aaron Burr actually challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel. Burr was incensed that Hamilton was always there to get in his way, and Hamilton was a man of great pride and a lot of insecurity. And you put two and two together, there's an acceptance. We don't know who shot first. There's some theory that maybe Hamilton tried to miss on purpose, but end of the day, Aaron Burr kills one of America's greatest early minds early. And then, like any normal person after something like that, he attempted to divide America west and east, start a new nation himself, conquer Spanish America. There were so many plots he got involved in. He ends up fleeing to Europe. He's tried for treason and dies kind of in exile. If you made a list of America's worst vice presidents, he might be at the tippy top of that. So, little side story, John Adams once called him a balloon with inflammable air. Adams knew how to throw an insult, and that's a pretty good description of one of the more, morally bankrupt people in early U.S. history, and of course, vilified by the Hamilton musical. A couple of slides left, then you're on your way and being done. Jefferson does win re-election in 1804, but what's going on in the world that's concerning for the U.S. is that France and England, surprise, surprise, are fighting against one another. And just because we won a revolution and ended our alliance with France doesn't mean they are gone from our list of problems. France is a very powerful land army, and Britain still has the best navy on the ocean. And really what's happening is America wants to develop its little baby deer economy and trade freely internationally, but France and England are making that impossible, especially with them in conflict with one another. So we want to trade freely, but if we're trading with Britain at all, France is mad. If we're trading with France at all, Britain's mad. And we kind of want our cake and to be able to eat it too, and we can't have that at this time. And there's kind of a lack of respect. We're getting little brothered a little bit as this young nation. As a practical example, in 1807, there's the Chesapeake incident right outside of Virginia where a British ship kills, I think, 3 Americans. They wound 18 off the coast of Virginia. And there's like a half-hearted apology, but America doesn't feel really respected by these already established European empires, despite the fact that we won our independence and have gotten off to a decent start as a nation. And that's going to force Jefferson's hand. And what he does is, they don't want war. We don't want anything to break out. We try to avoid that in the 90s. We're going to try to do that again for as long as we can. But Britain and France have to be dealt with. So Jefferson does something that goes kind of against everything he's ever kind of promoted about federal government power. And he proposes that America place an embargo, an all-out stopping of any trade from our ports to foreign countries for a short period of time. Okay? And this is a big plan, and it's kind of a risky one, but the idea is if we hold something or withhold something, Britain and France will come around and realize how great America is for them. I don't know, this would be very petty. I don't know if I would ever do this, but like if I had a class period that was being very disrespectful, not appreciating work, still struggling on tests, and I kind of said, hey, no study guide, no review, no slides for your test next class. You guys haven't earned that. I'm withholding that study guide. Not because I'm going to do that every unit moving forward, but for me to prove a point, like you need to appreciate what the teacher's giving to you. I'm going to withhold this, so hopefully the students start respecting the classwork more, whatever behaviors I'm trying to fix. That's Jefferson's logic with this trade embargo. He hoped to wake up the world to America's value by withholding what we have. Just like the teacher withholding the study guide to increase respect or whatever. But surprise, surprise, America's economy is really going to struggle. Illegal trade booms. There's a lack of respect. There's a frustration, especially from people that make a living off of international trade, that I have to stop my business. I don't know if I can really do a COVID lockdown comparison to this, but there were probably a lot of small business owners in 2020. They were very frustrated. Federal government saying, "Hey, you have to shut down, but this business doesn't shut down. My job happens to be a public sphere job, so then I have to take a loss for this month of time, even though the guy next door with this business." You get what I'm saying? Like, people were really frustrated with this policy, and it felt like the federal government was very much encroaching on their rights to trade, all for these international relations with Britain and France. So, in Jefferson's final days, Congress passes like a watered-down version of this embargo. It's called the Non-Intercourse Act, and it basically said, okay, we'll do foreign trade, but just not with Britain and France. And this doesn't really work because the original issue was our relationship with Britain and France. So you say, well, no, we're open to foreign markets now, but we're not going to be open to the two nations that we need the most, that we have the most issues with. So it's kind of a solution, but like it kind of also isn't. So America's got problems in Jefferson's last days. Our next president, aka James Madison, is going to have these own issues, and they're going to continue to boil as you get into the 1810s. Hopefully that wasn't too bad. All you have to do, this is what I have period 5 complete to end their day, is now go back to your hypocrite activity 1 with the celebrities, and this probably should be the most detailed and have the most bullets and filled out. Look at your notes and fill out the Jefferson box left, Jefferson box right, and then tell me, do you think Thomas Jefferson was a hypocrite or not? And then I'll snag those from you, and hopefully we'll be kind of back to normal post PSAT when I see you guys on Thursday. Have a good day. Email me if you have any questions.